Thank you to the sponsor of this video, LEGACYBOX. Options for watching TV were very different during the 1970s. For one, there were really only 3 TV channels plus public broadcasting. That's right, just 3. No streaming services, no endless options. You'd also have to get up and manually turn the dial to change channels. It was a time in which we waited for our favorite shows, which included nightly shows that were popular and Saturday morning cartoons. It was a big deal when you could pour a big bowl of cereal and binge hours of your favorite animated shows. But with the limited options on the television, it's no wonder kids spent so much time outside. Well, that and the fact that some parents made their kids go outside and play. During the 70s, making a mixtape was an art form. It took patience and dedication to sit by the radio for hours, waiting for the right song to be played. It didn't matter how good your timing was either, because pushing down the play and record buttons at precisely the right time still sometimes had the DJ talking over the intro. And that was just part of the charm. Cassettes had their quirks too, like when they got tangled and you would have to use a pencil to wind them back in. Cassettes made it pretty easy to create what we know today as a playlist, and this was the first time we could listen anywhere we wanted. Did you ever run around the house and pretend you were Superman or Batman? Well, if you did during the 1970s, then you most likely had on a pair of superhero underoos. For many kids, they served a dual purpose. They were underwear and part of a costume when you were strutting around the house, feeling invincible. Superhero underoos were more than just clothing. They were your identity, especially the ones that matched the actual superhero outfits. Nowadays, kids can never appreciate their underwear in the same way. During the 1970s, record stores were not just places to buy music. They were social gathering spots. Just like the mall of the 1980s, young people would hang out with friends, browse through vinyl records, and even listen to albums before they purchased them. Store employees at this time were also music enthusiasts, and they would recommend hidden gems. It also wasn't uncommon for you to strike up a conversation with a stranger who was into the same music as you. So the local record store was a special place, and yet another experience that is hard to replicate today. Hitchhiking during the 1970s was surprisingly easy and acceptable. It was very common to see people thumbing a ride on the side of the road. Drivers would often not hesitate to pick up hitchhikers, and it was seen as a way to help out a fellow traveler. There was more of a sense of camaraderie on the open road back then, and that's hard to understand in today's world. But it wasn't without risk, and there was still a chance you might encounter a few weirdos, and that was just part of the fun. Nowadays, it's illegal to hitch free rides in many places, but back then, it wasn't unusual to find a service member, a student, or even a hippie thumbing for a ride. When you think back to the 1970s, men had some serious style. They had manly mustaches, sideburns, big hair, and that distinct aroma of aftershave wafting around them. It was all about the macho look, and men took their grooming pretty seriously. This was also coupled with some pretty bold choices in clothing too, and as long as you could leave a couple of buttons undone so you could show off your hairy chest, you were good to go. Nothing quite matches the swagger men had in the 1970s. And speaking of grooming, ladies too had their own unique products to give them that 1970s look. Sun-In was all the rage, promising sun-kissed highlights. Women would spray it into their hair and head outside hoping for those perfect golden locks. And who doesn't remember the smell of Love's Baby Soft, a signature scent from the 1970s? The sweet, youthful fragrance was a defining smell that had all the girls wearing Baby Soft. But I'm not sure the ad campaign would fly today. When the telephone that hung in the kitchen rang, it was always answered. This was before caller ID, so people had no idea who was calling. Can you imagine? You didn't know if it was your best friend or a sales call, which meant there was a chance that you might recognize the voice on the other end and spend some time getting twisted up in the phone cord while you talked. Or you might be yelling across the house to let someone else know the call was for them. Today's kids might find it unbelievable that we willingly picked up the phone without the slightest clue as to who was on the other end. To best capture the moments in the 1970s, you absolutely needed a Polaroid camera. The idea of hitting the button and instantly getting a picture developed was gratifying, but you had to be selective because each roll of film only had a certain number of pictures. And then there was the practice of shaking the picture to help it develop faster, which was just a myth. But you couldn't take the bulky Polaroid camera with you everywhere, so there were also photo booths that were strategically placed where teenagers congregated. Places like arcades, malls, and roller rinks were ideal, so best friends and couples could capture the day with a series of goofy and fun pictures. If you were to step back in time and visit a 1970s kitchen, you'd probably find a fair share of mushroom-themed decor. Mushroom plates, mushroom curtains, mushroom wallpaper. They were everywhere. Everything back then seemed to have an earthy aesthetic, and mushrooms must have been the perfect fungus to represent that style. I guess you'd call it charm, and every corner of the room seemed to be inspired by it. As you waited for the weekend and that special morning of cartoons, you also needed a sugary cereal to help you enjoy it. The 1970s was all about finding the best surprise toy inside the cereal box. Kids would beg their parents for a certain brand of cereal, not because of the taste, but because of the toy. It may have been a silly game or a small figurine, but it was like finding a treasure when you dug down to the bottom of the box and pulled out the prize. This excitement made morning cereal more than just breakfast, which is much different than today. Opening a beer or soda can in the 1970s was a bit different than what we are used to today. You'd pull the ring back and peel back the aluminum tab, and back then, most of the tabs were just tossed on the ground. These sharp pieces of discarded metal were a nuisance, especially on beaches or places where you might walk barefoot. These pull tabs were just another hazard that we faced, and the tops would change shortly after to the more familiar stay tab that we recognize today. But it was still all part of the fun of living in the 1970s. Having a bike in the 1970s was one thing, but if you had an iconic chopper bike with a banana seat, you were the envy of the neighborhood. These bikes had extended frames and low-slung seats, and they represented the ultimate in 1970s coolness. Rich kids didn't just ride these bikes, they made a statement as they cruised around the block. They were attention-grabbing because they came in a variety of vibrant colors, and the high-rise handlebars set them apart from all the other regular bikes. A chopper was a source of envy for other kids, and it was another thing that set rich kids apart in the 1970s. When it comes to 70s fashion, it's impossible to overlook the moon boots. These funky, futuristic boots were designed to resemble astronaut footwear. Rich kids loved them not just for their outlandish appearance, but because they kept their feet warm during those chilly winters. These were the type of boots you might wear on a ski trip, making them a must-have for families who enjoyed winter getaways. Moon boots signaled that you were not just fashionable, but also up for some lavish adventures. Imagine having not one, but several phones scattered throughout your house. For rich kids in the 1970s, this was reality. They didn't just have the classic rotary phone in the kitchen. Some had telephones in the living room and bedrooms as well. For a kid, having a private phone in the bedroom signaled you lived a life of luxury that other kids just dreamt about. These kids could actually have private conversations behind a closed door instead of standing in the busy kitchen. The 1970s was a turning point for gaming, and rich kids were at the forefront of this revolution. The Pong home console was the very first home video game system, and it allowed kids to play a simplified version of table tennis in the comfort of their own homes. It was an absolute game changer and a source of endless entertainment, especially if you were one of the friends invited over to play. The rich kids were always happy to show off their cutting-edge technology to friends, and it announced who was ahead of the curve in the world of technology and entertainment. Tiger Beat magazine, the teen idol publication of the 1970s, was a must-have for any rich kid. And they didn't just have a one-off magazine from the grocery store shelf. They had a full-year subscription. It was a monthly portal to the world of pop culture, filled with glossy photos of heartthrobs like Sean Cassidy and Leif Garrett. Having a subscription to Tiger Beat meant you knew all the up-and-coming teen sensations, popular fashion trends, and celebrity gossip. It was more than just a magazine. It was the closest thing to fame you could get while living in the suburbs of Middle America. In the 1970s, kitchen appliances were becoming more advanced, and the trash compactor was a prime example of how wealthy kids lived. Trash compactors made throwing away garbage fun, while at the same time reducing the need for frequent trips to take the garbage out. It was the mark of an efficient and modern kitchen, a space where many 1970s families gathered together. Having a trash compactor meant you had a sleek, high-tech kitchen that was ahead of its time. Grooming in the 70s was an art form, and one of the essential tools for any rich kid was to always have a goody super comb at the ready. Hairstyles in the 70s were taken very seriously, and this comb was their secret weapon. Its oversized, long teeth made it ideal for creating that signature 70s feathered hairstyle. So owning a super comb demonstrated your commitment to fashion and personal style. Simply by having that comb hanging out of your back pocket was a status symbol of a glamorous life. The release of Star Wars in 1977 was a cultural phenomenon, and rich kids were quick to embrace it. Owning the entire collection of Star Wars action figures, ships, and playsets wasn't just about being a fan. It was about being the envy of the neighborhood. These toys were scarce at first, so having them was a pretty big deal. The Star Wars toys brought the magic of the movies into our homes, and the rich kids were usually the first to get their hands on them. It wasn't just about owning the toys. It was about being able to relive the adventures of a galaxy far, far away. The ultimate in 1970s bedroom luxury was, of course, the waterbed, and rich kids everywhere couldn't get enough of the wavy bed early on. Waterbeds provided a unique and so-called relaxing sleeping experience, but more than anything, they added a touch of opulence to any bedroom. That was, of course, if you could afford one of them. Generally, waterbeds were very expensive, so it was unusual to see one outside of a parent's bedroom. So that is why it was such a big deal if a rich kid had one in their room. If you had a color TV in your bedroom during the 1970s, that meant you were one of the lucky ones. Black and white TVs were still very common, and color TVs were making their way into the living rooms of homes across the country. But having one in the bedroom was a status symbol. Can you imagine being able to watch your favorite shows in full color from the comfort of your own bed? This was the reality for some. And in addition to having multiple TVs in the house, some rich families even had a TV with a clicker that allowed them to change the channel without getting up, which was mind-blowing. Rich kids in the 1970s also embraced handheld electronic gadgets, and one of the most beloved was the Mattel electronic football game. This device allowed kids to simulate the excitement of a football game in electronic form. It was very simple, yet pretty addictive, providing hours of fun for those that could afford it. Rich kids always seem to have the latest and greatest in electronic entertainment. The Mattel electronic football game is just another example of our rich friends getting it first, which built up the excitement and made us want it even more. Let's talk about the absolute biggest symbol of wealth and luxury in the 1970s, the Inground swimming pool. Rich families with two-story houses and spacious backyards often had these, turning their homes into a private oasis for summer fun. Having an in-ground pool meant you always had a glorious suntan and could host the most exclusive pool parties for all of your friends. It was the ultimate status symbol that showcased affluence, and we all knew someone that was living that lifestyle. I mean, who wouldn't want a built-in paradise right in their backyard? In the 1970s, stepping into an arcade felt like entering another world. Rows of flashing pinball machines lined the walls, and early video games like Pong and Space Invaders captured our imaginations. With a pocket full of quarters, we'd compete for high scores by mastering the timing of flippers, or by battling pixelated invaders. The sounds of the machines and the smell of greasy pizza filled the air, creating an atmosphere that was pure electricity. Earning a few extra plays, or finally topping the leaderboard, was a badge of honor in a time when fun wasn't downloaded, it was earned. The faint sound of a jingling tune rolling through the neighborhood would send kids into a frenzy, sprinting barefoot across lawns and sidewalks. We'd scramble for spare change, digging through couch cushions, or raiding the kitchen junk drawer, just in time to flag down the colorful truck. Waiting in line, sweaty and breathless, was half the excitement. The other half was tearing into a rocket pop or a push pop before it melted in the summer heat. Those sunny afternoons chasing the ice cream man felt endless, and every sweet treat tasted like pure magic. Halloween nights in the 1970s belonged entirely to kids. Dressed in store-bought masks or homemade costumes, we roamed the dark streets in noisy packs, armed only with pillowcases and flashlights. No parents hovered nearby. The only rule was to stick together and be home before bedtime. Porch lights glowed like beacons, and the excitement of a full bag of candy kept us moving from house to house. It was a thrilling, independent adventure, where the biggest worry was trading off the candy you didn't like once you got back home. Getting dropped off at camp meant stepping into a world without parents, where days were filled with canoe races, campfire songs, and games of capture the flag. Letters from home took days to arrive, and homesickness was cured by making friends or diving into new activities. Whether you were learning to shoot arrows, crafting friendship bracelets, or hiking dusty trails, every day felt like a mini adventure. And the smell of wood smoke still brings back memories of those carefree weeks spent sleeping in cabins under the stars. Summer days stretched out forever, and the only limit was how long you could stay outside before getting hungry. We'd hop on bikes in the morning and search for the action, a pickup baseball game, a game of kick the can, or maybe a new tree to climb. Parents rarely knew exactly where we were, trusting we'd show up when the streetlights flickered on. Scraped knees, dirty faces, and grass-stained jeans were all part of the deal. Freedom wasn't scheduled. It was found in every backyard and empty lot we could claim. Before allowances became standard, a lot of kids earned their spending money the old-fashioned way, by working. Paper routes meant rising before the sun, rain or shine, to toss newspapers onto doorsteps. Others roamed parks and neighborhoods collecting empty soda bottles, exchanging them for a handful of coins at the corner store. Hard work taught responsibility early, and there was nothing quite like the pride of buying something with money you earned yourself, even if it all went straight into candy or baseball cards. It was worth the effort. Armed with boards, bent nails, and endless imagination, we turned a secret place in the woods into a kingdom. Every fort had its own secret code, creaky floors, and lopsided walls that somehow stayed standing through storms and roughhousing. Hours disappeared as we hammered, tied ropes, and scavenged materials from garages or alleys. A hidden clubhouse was more than just a structure. It was a fortress against boredom, a meeting place for neighborhood missions, and a tiny slice of independence no adult could touch. The radio was our portal to the wider world, a place where Casey Kasem's voice counted down the top 40, and we waited, fingers poised over the record button, to capture our favorite songs. DJs felt like trusted friends, spinning new hits we hadn't heard yet, alongside old favorites we knew by heart. Songs back then weren't instantly available, so waiting for them to come on the radio took patience and a little bit of luck. Getting banged up was almost a rite of passage. Whether you wiped out on your bike, crashed into a fence during a backyard football game, or took a tumble off the jungle gym, the reaction was always the same: just walk it off. If you did get a skinned up knee, or drew blood in any way, you most likely were treated with a dab of mercurochrome and were sent on your way. The playgrounds of the 1970s were playgrounds of adventure. They had towering metal rocket ships, daring kids to climb to dizzying heights. Slides were also tall, steep, and sizzling hot under the summer sun. And the ground below was often nothing but packed dirt or hard asphalt. Risk was all part of the fun. You climbed higher, swung faster, and learned how to fall without breaking anything important. Early in the 1970s, a cold soda from a vending machine cost just a dime, and purchasing a cold drink was half the fun. You'd drop the coin, heard the satisfying clunk, and pulled an ice-cold glass bottle from the machine's racks. Popping off the cap using the built-in opener on the side felt official, and savoring a fizzy orange or cola drink on a hot day was pure satisfaction. Prices, however, climbed as the decade wore on, but for a few sweet years, a single coin could buy pure refreshment. Every payphone was a potential gold mine if you were lucky. We checked the coin return slot every time we passed one, hoping to find a forgotten dime or quarter rattling inside. Payphones stood on every corner, in gas stations, grocery stores, and malls, waiting for someone to call home. Finding loose change felt like winning the lottery. Whether you used it to call your mom or buy a candy bar was entirely up to you. Back then, having your birthday party at McDonald's, Burger King, or even Shakey's Pizza was the ultimate celebration. Paper crowns, balloons tied to chairs, and massive sheet cakes made the day feel larger than life. Sometimes you would even get a behind-the-scenes tour or a special visit from a mascot like Ronald McDonald. Goodie bags filled with tiny toys and coupons were prized possessions long after the party ended. Long before laser tag and trampoline parks, a birthday party with friends and fast food was the best kind of magic. When the summer heat cranked up and boredom set in, dragging the garden hose into the yard turned any afternoon into a splash party. Simple sprinklers were enough to keep us running, slipping, and squealing with laughter for hours. It really didn't take a fancy water park to have a blast. Just a patch of grass, bare feet, and a fearless attitude about getting soaked. We certainly didn't worry about muddy clothes or grass stains. We just lived in the moment. In the 1970s, kids still spent quite a bit of time around train tracks. If they weren't placing pennies on the tracks, they might be found hurling rocks at passing trains, or using the rails as a balance beam. Walking along the tracks was common, and making it across a trestle was an adventure for many kids. Despite the dangers, kids would dare each other to keep going, even when they heard the distant rumble of a train. The narrow trestles, which sometimes stretched over deep ravines, added to the thrill. Back then, the potential danger of falling or being hit by a train was a real fear, but some kids still worked up the courage to accept the challenge. Having a BB gun was a regular pastime in the 1970s. Target practice was usually an old soda can, and carrying them around the neighborhood was commonplace. Many kids would also have BB gun fights with their friends. In the 1970s, being shot by a BB was a badge of honor, and no adults were around to tell them to stop. Getting hit on your bare skin would leave a good-sized welt, but it would heal and not stop you from doing it again. Sure, BBs could ricochet and hit someone in the face or eye, but that was just an acceptable risk. In those days, everyone, including parents, seemed to have a much higher tolerance for danger. Exploring abandoned buildings or sneaking onto construction sites was a classic 1970s activity. Kids were outside constantly and would fill their day with all sorts of adventures, including climbing over rusty nails, broken glass, and loose boards without giving it a second thought. The thrill of discovering an empty space and turning it into a secret clubhouse or battleground outweighed the risks of stepping on sharp objects or scraping your knee. No one really worried about it, and most parents didn't even know where their kids were spending their afternoons. The freedom to roam and make some risky choices was what growing up was all about. Rolling down hills in giant tractor tires was the kind of wild, unpredictable fun that made the 1970s an exciting time to be a kid. You'd climb inside and let your friends push you down a steep hill, completely out of control as the tire gained speed. It didn't matter if you crashed into a tree or rolled off into the bushes. It was all about who could stay rolling the longest. You'd of course end up dizzy and banged up, but it was all in the spirit of fun. With no helmets, no supervision, and no way to stop once the tire got going. It was a game that gave kids a shot of pure adrenaline. Back in the 70s, as kids were roaming free, they often snacked on wild berries or sipped nectar from honeysuckle vines while playing outdoors. It was part of a carefree spirit of the time. If it looked like food, kids would try it, and so would most adults. There was always a slight chance of eating something poisonous or having an allergic reaction, but that didn't stop kids from enjoying nature's bounty. It added to the adventure of playing in the yard or exploring the neighborhood, and most kids were taught by their parents what wild plants were safe to snack on. Building a makeshift bike ramp and daring each other to jump over friends was an everyday thrill for 1970s kids. The ramps were usually cobbled together from old wood, wobbly and unstable, because you had to work with what you could find. You'd see how much air you could get, with friends lying on the ground below, cheering you on. And of course there were no helmets or pads, and crashing was likely. So scraped knees and bruised egos were something that kids learned to deal with. In those days, kids lived for the adrenaline rush and the bragging rights that came with a successful jump. Nothing felt freer than riding in the back of a station wagon with no seatbelts, facing the rear window, and making faces at the cars behind you. In the 1970s, it was common for families to pile into the car for long drives, and kids would often play games or nap in the back, with no worries about strapping on a seatbelt. Parents didn't think twice about it either. It was just how things were done. There were still sudden stops that sent kids flying forward, or turns that made them bump into one another, but it was all still worth it. In the 1970s, kids would willingly chase after DDT trucks as they spread pesticide through neighborhoods, thinking the thick fog was fun to run through. No one really understood the long-term health risks of inhaling the chemicals at the time. It seemed like just another summer activity, like riding bikes or playing tag, and parents didn't seem too concerned either. The trucks would roll slowly down the street, leaving a cloud behind, and kids would race through it, giggling and trying to stay in the fog as long as possible. When winter came, one of the most daring things kids did back then was something called hookie bobbing, which meant grabbing onto the back of a moving car and sliding on the icy streets. It was like a makeshift sledding adventure, except the cars were real, and the ice was unpredictable. The goal was to hold on as long as you could without wiping out and getting hurt. There were many forms of this, some including a rope pulling a sled, but it was the thrill of seeing how long you could hang on while the car sped away. This was especially popular on snow days, while kids were at home and needed fun things to keep them busy. Playing with fireworks was another exciting, though risky, part of being a kid in the 70s. Whether it was cherry bombs or bottle rockets, kids handled them with very little supervision, lighting them off in backyards for fun or trying to blow something up. Sometimes things didn't go quite as planned, with a black cat going off too soon or a bottle rocket shooting in the wrong direction. But that didn't stop kids from eagerly lighting the next fuse. Playing with small-scale explosives was exciting, especially for young boys during this relaxed era. Neighborhood games of football or street hockey in the 1970s were all about rough and tumble fun. Nobody wore pads or helmets, and injuries like scrapes, bruises, and the occasional broken bone were just part of being a kid. Full-contact sports were often expected, and everyone played to win. These games could get intense, and would often go on until the streetlights came on, with the kids settling their own disputes and handling whatever bumps and bruises came their way. In the 1970s, it wasn't unusual to see kids riding bikes, skateboards, or scooters barefoot and shirtless. Summer afternoons were spent zooming down hills, wind in your hair, with nothing between you and the pavement. The risks were clear: cuts, stings, scrapes, and even rashes. But it wasn't something that kept kids from having as much fun as they could. Kids just weren't concerned with covering up. After a rough scrape, Mom was always ready with the Bactine or mercurochrome, and had calamine lotion for things like poison ivy, which was everywhere at the time. And of course, there were always those Band-Aids from the metal tins. I mean, who could forget that Band-Aid jingle from the 1970s?
Depend on the protection of America's #1 bandage.
I am stuck on Band-Aid, 'cause Band-Aid stuck on me.
Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, and make sure to check the description of this video for links to pick up a t-shirt and sign up for the newsletter. Also, don't forget to visit our friends at Horn and Hard Art to save 10% on your next order. Visit hornandhardart.com/recollection. Thank you to our loyal Patreon supporters listed here. Visit patreon.com/recollectionroad to join the club.